He didn't bark, not when they passed his cage, not when they poured his food, not even on the day they marked him for death. At the Franklin Haven shelter, they called him a ghost, silent, still, forgotten. But what no one knew was that he had once saved lives, chased darkness, and wore a badge without needing one. And just when the world gave up on him, a woman grieving her own loss opened his cage door. And that's when everything changed. The wind rolled dry leaves across the cracked asphalt parking lot of Franklin Haven Animal Shelter. From the outside, the shelter was unremarkable. Weather-worn siding, a creaky aluminum sign, a small fenced yard where young, energetic dogs barked and jumped against the chain link in a desperate bid to be noticed. Inside, the air was a mix of antiseptic, wet fur, and silent longing. The kind of silence that had weight, the kind that remembered. At the far back of the shelter, beyond the cages of yapping puppies and excited tail wags, was a shadow curled in a corner. His name was Gideon. Gideon was a 17-year-old German shepherd with a thick, fading coat that once shone with the authority of a working dog. Now it was dulled with time, patchy in places, stiff in others. One eye was clouded from age, the other brown and dull, half-lidded, as if even blinking had become an effort. He was large, but sunken, his ribs visible beneath the sagging skin. His once regal posture had melted into a crumpled heap of bone and fur on a worn blanket that smelled of bleach and memory. For 6 months, Gideon hadn't barked. He hadn't stood up for anyone who passed. He hadn't eaten much beyond what he needed to survive. And no one, not one soul, had stopped for him. Then came Tessa Monroe. Tessa was 38, tall with a long, angular build, softened only slightly by the loose wool coat she wore to guard against Tennessee's December wind. Her dark brown hair, once kept in professional curls, now hung in a practical bun at the nape of her neck, wisps loose and dancing around her pale, serious face. Her eyes, storm gray, keen, had once been warm. Once, before the accident. 2 years ago, her husband Jamie was killed by a drunk driver on his way home from the hardware store. Just a 10-minute errand. Just a turn gone wrong. Since then, Tessa had retreated. Once an active therapist known for her empathy and fierce dedication to trauma recovery, she'd slowly withdrawn from her own life. She had taken a reduced caseload, moved into a smaller house, stopped decorating for holidays. Her heart had become a locked room, and the key had gone missing the night she buried Jamie. Today wasn't about finding that key. It was a whim, really, a pause in routine. She told herself it was curiosity, not grief. She had driven past Franklin Haven twice that week on the way to the market, and something about the rundown building gnawed at her. Maybe it was the billboard with the phrase, "Give them a second chance." Or maybe it was that the silence in her own home had started to feel too loud. She stepped inside the shelter just as a gust of wind rattled the door behind her. The young woman at the front desk looked up from her clipboard and offered a polite smile. "Hi there. Looking to adopt?" Tessa hesitated, then shook her head. "No, just browsing." The woman, Emma, according to her name tag, nodded, used to that answer. "You're welcome to look around. Most of them are real sweet." Tessa walked the rows slowly. Kennels lined both sides of the hallway, each one holding a dog with eager eyes, bouncing paws, tails thumping against metal. Some barked, some whined, a few pressed their noses to the cage bars, eyes pleading. She paused occasionally, smiled politely at a wagging terrier, bent down to look at a shivering pit mix, but nothing reached her. Not really. Then she reached the end of the hall and saw him. The cage was dark. A single bulb flickered above it, casting the space in an uneasy half-light. Gideon didn't lift his head. He didn't stir. He might as well have been a rug, lifeless, folded in on himself. But something about the stillness was too intentional, too knowing. There was weight in it. Tessa blinked. "Who's this?" Emma had followed behind, quietly observing her path. Now she stepped forward, voice softer. "That's Gideon. 17. Been here about 6 months. No interest." She hesitated. "He doesn't do much. We think he's just waiting." "For what?" Tessa asked. Emma shrugged. "Maybe for the people who dropped him off. Maybe for the end." Tessa crouched slowly, ignoring the cold ache in her knees. She studied Gideon's face, scarred, worn, his muzzle almost white with age. He had the look of something once noble, now discarded. Her breath caught unexpectedly. That was how Jamie had looked in the hospital bed, bruised, hollow, already letting go. A lump formed in her throat. "Does he have a story?" Emma nodded. "He was a working dog, apparently. K-9 unit, retired years ago. His last owners said he wasn't moving well anymore, didn't respond to commands. They brought him in with a bag of old treats and just walked away." Tessa reached a tentative hand to the bars. Gideon didn't flinch, didn't even flick his ear, but his one good eye twitched. For a moment, it almost looked like he was listening. "Has he eaten today?" she asked. Emma exhaled slowly. "Barely touches food. We try broth, soft kibble, hand feeding. Some days he'll take a bite. Most days he just lays there." Tessa didn't know why she stayed crouched. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was how this dog, this forgotten creature, made her feel a little less alone. She didn't realize she was holding her breath until she released it in a slow sigh. "Gideon," she whispered. Nothing. Tessa stood up. On a small shelf nearby sat a portable radio, left on low. The news crackled through. Still no sign of 7-year-old Carly Matthews, last seen walking alone to Hawthorne Elementary. The community continues its search as concern grows. Before the sentence finished, Gideon's ear twitched. The motion was small, barely perceptible, but it was the first reaction he'd shown since she arrived. Tessa turned her head sharply. "Did you see that?" Emma tilted her head. "See what?" "He reacted to that." She gestured to the radio. Emma gave her a tired smile. "Sometimes he twitches in his sleep." But Tessa wasn't so sure. She glanced back at Gideon. His eye was open now, half-lidded but awake, staring at nothing, or maybe at everything. Outside, the wind picked up again, moaning faintly as it swept through the parking lot. Somewhere far off, a child's voice echoed from a news clip, replayed again and again on TV screens and radios. "Help me!" Gideon blinked, and for the first time in 2 years, Tessa Monroe felt something stir behind the locked door in her chest. Something that sounded suspiciously like hope. The forms were done quickly, far too quickly for what it meant. Tessa signed her name on the last adoption line with a firm stroke of the pen, as if hesitation might shatter the fragile conviction she carried in her chest. Greg, the shelter manager, handed her a leash, the worn leather softened by years of use. It had no tags, no name, just like him now. She walked back to the cage slowly, each footstep echoing against the linoleum. Gideon hadn't moved. His clouded eye didn't follow her. He still stared into a void only he could see. Tessa unlocked the door and crouched again, this time placing a tentative hand under his chest, unsure how a creature so large could feel so feather-light. He didn't resist, didn't react. Lifting him was like lifting folded memories. With a quiet grunt, she managed to carry him out to her car, cradling him as if he might shatter. The December wind caught the edges of her coat and whipped her hair across her face as she opened the back door. Gideon was laid gently on a nest of blankets in the back seat, and for a moment he blinked. Once, slowly. Tessa stared at him as she closed the door and climbed into the driver's seat. The drive back to her modest brick home was long, not because of distance, but the weight inside the car. Gideon was silent. Tessa was silent. The world outside seemed distant. Her house was a simple, one-story bungalow tucked near the edge of Franklin's older neighborhood. It was the kind of house that had once held laughter, candlelight dinners, and music. Now it echoed when she walked across the wood floors. Her neighbor, Mrs. Albright, appeared as Tessa pulled into the driveway. The elderly woman stood on her porch in a mustard-colored cardigan, arms crossed, peering over a large ceramic mug. Her thin frame was upright, though her back curved ever so slightly at the shoulders, a sign of age she refused to acknowledge. Her gray-white curls were pinned neatly, and her expression, as always, teetered between curiosity and judgment. "Well, that's not a cat," she called out sharply. Tessa stepped out of the car, brushing hair from her face. "No, not a cat." Mrs. Albright tilted her head, squinting. "That a German shepherd?" "Yes. His name is Gideon." The older woman's lips pressed into a line before she walked carefully down the 3 porch steps and approached with surprising agility for 78. Haven't seen one of those in years. Had one during the war. Name was Bramble. Smarter than half the men I dated." Tessa managed a faint smile as she opened the back door and gently guided Gideon out with both arms. He slumped against her, barely able to stand, but his legs touched the ground. Mrs. Albright peered at him, her voice softer now. "Old boy like that's got stories." Tessa glanced at her. "You really think they remember?" "Oh, they remember," she replied. "Bramble used to know when I was about to cry. Wouldn't even make a sound. Just lay his head on my lap, like he knew I didn't need noise. Just presence." Tessa looked down at Gideon. His eye was dull, his breathing shallow, but for a brief second, something flickered across his brow. Recognition, maybe? Or pain? She couldn't tell. She thanked Mrs. Albright with a quiet nod and guided Gideon inside. The house felt too bright, the windows catching late sunlight and casting long shadows across the hardwood. She had placed a large dog bed in the living room near the fireplace, layered with flannel blankets. As soon as he was lowered into it, Gideon curled into himself like a dying leaf. She sat beside him, brushing loose fur from his side. "You're home," she whispered. That night, the wind howled across the rooftops. Tessa sat on the couch with a book open but unread on her lap. Her eyes drifted frequently toward Gideon, who remained motionless. Just when she considered turning in for the night, her phone buzzed. The alert was from the local news app. Another update on Carly Matthews. Tessa's fingers froze over the screen. Carly, 7 years old, auburn-haired, last seen wearing a blue puffer coat and pink snow boots. Missing now for over 72 hours. Tessa's breath tightened. A flash memory gripped her. 2 years ago, a young mother with hollow eyes and cracked hands sat in her therapy office, trembling under the weight of postpartum depression. Tessa had helped her through it, months of slow rebuilding. That mother's name had been Elise Matthews, Carly's mother. It couldn't be a coincidence. Tessa stood abruptly, her fingers curling around the phone. She walked into the kitchen, needing space from the thought. The kettle hissed on the stove as she stared out the window into the darkness. Her heart drummed harder. Her professional training told her to keep distance, to not get personally involved. But her heart had other plans. From the living room, a sudden thump startled her. She rushed back in. Gideon had shifted, barely, but enough for his leg to tap the wooden floor. His eye was open. Not glassy this time, but following the flicker of the fireplace. As she approached, she noticed his ears perk, just slightly. "Did you hear something?" she whispered. No response. But something was different. His eye met hers. Not fully, not with focus, but it was a gaze, and it held something. She crouched beside him, reached out, and brushed his head gently. He didn't flinch. Minutes passed like that, just the two of them and the firelight. She leaned back and exhaled. "I used to have someone to sit here with," she said softly. He laughed too loud, cooked like a maniac, left his socks everywhere, but he had eyes that always knew when I needed to be held. He's gone now. Gideon's tail moved, barely, a twitch at most. Tessa swallowed. "I didn't plan for you. I don't even know if I'm enough to take care of anyone anymore." Stillness. "But maybe we can figure it out together." Outside, the wind began to die. The house grew quiet again. Tessa stood and turned off the light. In the dim glow of the fire, Gideon blinked once, slowly, then closed his eye. And for the first time since she had lost Jamie, and for the first time since Gideon had been left behind, they both fell asleep not completely alone. The silence in the house was deeper than usual that night, heavy like the first breath before grief sets in. It settled into the corners of every room, lingered in the shadows cast by the flickering fireplace, and wrapped around Gideon's frail body like an old blanket. He lay motionless on the dog bed near the hearth, the steady rise and fall of his chest barely perceptible. Tessa moved through the house with deliberate quiet. She had changed into a soft flannel shirt and cotton lounge pants, her hair undone from its bun, hanging around her shoulders in tired waves. She looked older in the dim light, more worn than her 38 years suggested. Loss had carved subtle lines into her features, the faint downturn at the corners of her lips, the hollowness around her eyes, the stiffness in her shoulders. She wasn't fragile, not in the way people sometimes assumed of widows, but she was tender. Like wood softened by years of water, still whole, still standing, but forever changed. She stood by the fireplace for a moment, a glass of water in her hand, unsure why her feet had brought her there again. Then, almost without thinking, she reached into the drawer of the end table and pulled out the small silver frame. The photo inside was faded, but the smile hadn't dulled. Jamie's smile never did. He had been tall, broad-shouldered, with a grin that made waitresses forget their pens and strangers start conversations. He'd worn flannel too, always 2 sizes too big, and called it casual armor. In the photo, he had his arm wrapped around Tessa, their cheeks pressed together, her laugh caught mid-breath. It had been taken on a cabin trip, one of their last. She placed the frame gently on the mantel, centering it above the fire. Behind her, Gideon stirred. It wasn't a full movement, not a shift or a stretch, but a sound. A soft, broken noise, like a breath trying to remember how to be a voice. Tessa turned sharply, her heart catching. Gideon hadn't made a single sound since she brought him home. Not when she carried him, not when she offered food, not even when he collapsed into the blankets. But now, in the flickering glow of the fire, his ears twitched, and from deep in his throat came a low, wavering whine. Tessa knelt beside him, eyes wide. "Gideon?" He didn't look at her, but his gaze had shifted. His good eye was pointed toward the mantel, toward Jamie. She followed his line of sight, her breath shallow. "Is that what you see?" He whimpered again, barely audible, but it was something, more than she expected. Her fingers hovered just above his back, unsure whether touch would help or startle him. She gently placed her hand on his fur. It was coarse and brittle, like dried grass. He didn't flinch. "You knew someone like him, didn't you?" she murmured. "Someone who didn't throw you away." Gideon closed his eyes slowly. Not sleep. Something closer to surrender. The next morning arrived like a gray curtain. Clouds hung low over Franklin, and the wind tasted like snow. Tessa stirred her coffee at the kitchen table, watching Gideon from across the room. He hadn't moved much. The broth she had left for him overnight remained untouched. Still, something had shifted. She could feel it. A soft knock at the door broke her thoughts. She opened it to find a tall, lanky teenager shifting nervously on the porch. His dark hair was unkempt, a mop of curls that fell over one eye. He wore an oversized hoodie and jeans with frayed hems, and his eyes, hazel, darting, never held still. "Logan Banks," the boy mumbled. Tessa smiled gently. "Right, come in." Logan stepped inside, his hands jammed deep into the front pocket of his sweatshirt. He was 15 but carried the weight of someone much older. His gait was hesitant, cautious, like someone who had been startled too many times. Tessa had been referred to him by a counselor at the high school. Severe anxiety, night terrors, witnessed his father's death in a boating accident just a year prior. Since then, sleep had become rare, and words even rarer. She led him into the living room. "This is informal. We can just talk or sit in silence, whatever you need." Logan gave a small nod, eyes flitting nervously around the room until they landed on Gideon. "What's wrong with him?" he asked, voice quiet. "He's old, tired, just came home yesterday." Logan crossed the room slowly, dropped to one knee near Gideon's bed. He didn't try to touch him, just watched. "What's his name?" "Gideon." The boy tilted his head. "Cool name." Gideon didn't stir, but when Logan pulled the sleeve of his hoodie to scratch his wrist, the motion made a tiny noise, and Gideon's ear twitched. Logan noticed. "Hey, he moved." Tessa smiled, more surprised than she let on. "Yeah, he does that sometimes." They talked little after that, but Logan stayed longer than she expected, eventually sitting cross-legged near the fire, scribbling in a small notebook he pulled from his backpack. Gideon lay still the entire time, but his breathing seemed steadier. That evening after Logan left, Tessa turned on the television to catch up on the news. The missing child story had returned. Carly Matthews, age 7, missing 5 days now. They showed her school photo, a gap-toothed smile, freckles across her cheeks, hair tied back in pigtails. Then came the update. A pink mitten was found near Briarwood Creek, half buried in the mud. No prints. No further leads. Tessa felt a chill climb her spine. Behind her, Gideon let out another noise, a low, almost imperceptible whine. She turned, startled. His ears were perked. Not fully, not like a healthy dog would, but alert, awake. His eyes were locked on the screen. Tessa muted the television. He stared for another few seconds, then lowered his head again, exhaling slowly. Tessa sat beside him. Her hand found his back again, brushing slowly. "Did you know her?" she whispered. "Or someone like her?" No answer. But his breathing didn't falter. She reached over and turned the frame on the mantel just slightly, angling Jamie's face toward the room. That night, when she finally lay down, the house didn't feel as empty. Not because it was full, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone in it was listening. It began with a name, one that wasn't Gideon. Tessa sat at her kitchen table, the morning light slanting through the blinds, casting soft gold lines across the folders spread before her. The adoption records were thin, barely 3 pages, but a name caught her attention. Handler R. Rowan, Franklin PD, retired. It was handwritten, almost carelessly, but it was something. She tapped her pen against the table, her brows furrowed. She had always known Gideon had a past. You could see it in the way he moved, or didn't move. He carried himself like a soldier who hadn't quite made it home. What kind of past, though, was a different question. She picked up her phone and made the call. The voice that answered was gravelly, the kind that spoke of years soaked in coffee and late nights. Rowan speaking. Chief Rowan? She asked. My name is Tessa Monroe. I believe you used to work with a German shepherd named Axel. There was a long silence. Then slowly, Axel? Haven't heard that name in a while. What's this about? I think I have him. He goes by Gideon now. I adopted him last week from the Franklin Haven shelter. Another pause, this time heavier. You better come by. The retired police chief lived just outside the city limits in a small ranch-style home surrounded by pine trees and a tired wooden fence. Rowan himself was a broad-shouldered man in his 60s, with a thick gray beard and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. He wore a flannel shirt tucked into faded jeans and stood with a quiet authority that hadn't faded since retirement. He greeted her at the porch with a slow nod. You came. Tessa shook his hand. Thank you for meeting me. They stepped inside, and the house was exactly what she expected. Neat but worn, shelves lined with framed badges, medals, and a dusty American flag folded in a triangle in a glass case. Rowan gestured for her to sit, then disappeared into the back room and returned with a shoebox. He opened it slowly, revealing photos. Some old, some laminated. Axel wasn't just a K9, Rowan said. He was the best we had. He laid a photo on the table. In it, a younger Rowan stood beside a large German shepherd, tongue out, ears high, eyes alert. That face, though younger, brighter, was unmistakably Gideon. I was his handler for 10 years, Rowan continued. We were assigned to narcotics first, then moved to missing persons. Saved a lot of people. One night, Axel pulled me out of a wrecked cruiser after a pursuit went bad. I wouldn't be here if it weren't for him. Tessa ran her fingers lightly across the photo. What happened to him? Rowan's expression darkened. He got old, slowed down. The department wanted to retire him. Normally, handlers adopt their dogs, but I had heart issues. Hospitalized the same month they pulled Axel off duty. He went into reassignment. I assumed he was placed with a good home. He looked at her now, eyes hard. You're telling me they dumped him at a shelter? Tessa nodded slowly. 6 months ago. Rowan muttered something under his breath and rubbed a hand across his face. They discarded him like used equipment. Tessa hesitated, then added, He responds to certain things. The news, names. I think he remembers. He does, Rowan said quietly. That dog remembers everything. Back at home, Tessa found Logan sitting cross-legged on the rug beside Gideon's bed, a spiral notebook in his lap. The boy looked more at ease than she'd ever seen him. His shaggy curls fell in his face as he leaned down, reading softly from his page. I called the story The Dog Who Didn't Speak, Logan said when she approached. It's not finished, but it's about a dog who loses everything except his memory. Tessa smiled. Sounds like someone I know? Logan blushed slightly and closed the notebook. I slept last night, for the first time in months. He just stayed beside me. He does that, Tessa replied. You must be someone worth guarding. Logan reached out and gently touched Gideon's paw. I think he's still guarding someone. Maybe not just me. That afternoon, the neighborhood settled into the kind of quiet that came before a storm. Clouds gathered low and heavy, casting long shadows across the street. Tessa stepped out to check the mail and saw Mrs. Albright across the lawn, watering a bed of winter-resistant pansies. The old woman wore a thick navy sweater and a scarf tied neatly around her hair, her back straight despite her age. "Did he eat?" she called out. Tessa smiled faintly. "Half a bowl." "A miracle, then." Mrs. Albright walked toward her, glancing over at the front window where Gideon lay watching. "He was up this morning, just standing there, looking across the street, like he saw something I didn't." Tessa followed her gaze. Across the road was house number 14. It had once been occupied by a family of 5, but had stood empty for nearly 2 years. Windows boarded, grass overgrown, forlorn. "He stares at that house every day," Albright said, "like he's waiting for someone to come out." Tessa frowned. "You know who used to live there?" Albright nodded. "The Ramirez family, father, mother, 2 kids, moved out real sudden. But I remember, about 2 years ago, police came, searched the whole place, never said what for. But they stayed hours, dogs, flashlights, tape, then just nothing." Tessa felt her stomach twist. "Do you remember when that was?" "Summer. Year before last. Same time a girl named Mia went missing from the next county over. No one ever found her." Tessa looked back at Gideon, who hadn't taken his eye off the house. His body was still weak, but his gaze was steady, focused, like he knew something he couldn't say. That night, as the wind picked up and rain tapped against the windows, Tessa sat at her desk. The photo of Gideon, beside her. In her journal she wrote, "He was never just a dog. He was a witness, a soldier, and maybe a survivor of more than we know." She closed the book softly. Across the room, Gideon lifted his head just slightly. And in the stillness, the house listened. Because names could be forgotten. But truths, they had a way of waiting, just long enough for someone willing to listen. The house was a mansion, an ivory-bricked 3-story colonial with black shutters, a manicured lawn, and a stone pathway that split through rose bushes so perfectly trimmed they looked artificial. It stood on the edge of Willow Heights, a wealthy cul-de-sac that barely remembered the people who cleaned their windows or trained their dogs. Tessa parked at the curb and sat behind the wheel for a moment longer than necessary. The rain had just begun, light and hesitant, dotting the windshield like a prelude to something heavier. Her fingers tightened on the steering wheel. She didn't know exactly what she hoped to gain from this visit. Closure? Answers? Maybe just the chance to look them in the eyes and ask how anyone could discard a life that had once saved others. The door was answered by a man in his late 50s, sharp-jawed, tall, with salt and pepper hair combed too neatly and a black turtleneck that clung to his lean frame. His name was Raymond Knox, a former investment consultant, now comfortably retired. His eyes were blue, clear, and distant. The eyes of someone who'd long stopped feeling anything he didn't need to. "Yes," he said curtly. "I'm Tessa Monroe. I adopted Gideon." His brow furrowed. A flicker of something, annoyance or confusion, creased his forehead. "I'm sorry, who?" "The German shepherd, Axel. He lived with you after his retirement." There was a beat of silence, then a shrug. "Oh, him?" Tessa's chest tightened. "He's not him. He has a name. Axel. Gideon now." Raymond exhaled slowly, leaning against the doorframe like he couldn't be bothered. "Look, I don't know what you expect me to say. He was old. He started having accidents indoors. My wife has allergies. We didn't have time for a dog that couldn't pull his weight." "He wasn't a tool. He was your responsibility," Tessa snapped. "Lady, he was a working dog. They retire. They get old. We gave him 3 years after duty. Most people wouldn't even do that." She stepped back, jaw clenched. "You discarded him like trash. He gave everything to this town, to this country, and you tossed him in a shelter without a goodbye." Raymond's face remained still, but the edge in his voice sharpened. "We didn't want to watch him die. It was easier that way." "Easier for who?" she asked. The door shut in her face. Back in the car, her hands trembled as she reached for the ignition. She didn't cry. Anger had chased the sadness away, and now her mind raced faster than her breath. Gideon had saved lives, pulled people from fires and floodwater, tracked missing children, and they had reduced him to an inconvenience. That kind of cruelty didn't deserve her tears. When she arrived home, Logan was sitting cross-legged beside Gideon's bed, as usual. The boy's hoodie was oversized and splattered with rain from his walkover, his notebook open on his lap. He looked up when she came in, sensing something in her face. "Bad day?" he asked. "You could say that," she muttered, tossing her keys on the counter. "I met his former owners." Logan frowned, then looked down at Gideon. "They didn't deserve you, buddy." Gideon's eye opened slowly, the good one, and he shifted just slightly, enough to bring his snout closer to Logan's knee. It was more movement than he had shown in the last 12 hours. Logan's hand drifted down instinctively and rested on the shepherd's broad head. "I told him about my dream," Logan said quietly, his voice more tender now. "Being a cop, not the badge kind, like K-9 unit, just me and a dog like him, riding in a cruiser, saving people." "You'd be good at it," Tessa said, her voice softening. Logan smiled and leaned closer to Gideon. "I'd call you Sergeant G. You'd have your own vest, your own siren. You'd bark twice if the bad guy was behind the fence." He chuckled softly. "You'd be the brains. I'd just drive." Gideon let out a low, soft breath and, slowly, so slowly, he lifted his head enough to nuzzle against Logan's wrist. Then, with a dry tongue rough as old wool, he licked the boy's hand. Logan's breath caught. He looked up, eyes wide. "He's listening. He always has," Tessa whispered. Later that night, after Logan had gone home and the house had settled into its usual hush, Tessa sat at her laptop with a cup of herbal tea growing cold beside her. Something had been bothering her. A detail from Rowan's files. She pulled up the scanned documents she had copied after visiting the retired police chief. Axel, Gideon's original name, had once been a part of a special task unit. Most of his cases were standard K-9 work. Drug searches, search and rescue, officer support. But then she found it. A redacted file labeled Incident 0479B, Briarwood Case. Her eyes narrowed. The summary stated that Axel had been deployed to assist in the scent tracking of a suspect believed to be linked to a string of abductions. The notes were vague, but included terms like inconclusive results and handler reassignment. But what drew her attention was the date, July 12th, 2 years ago. The same week Carly Matthews had disappeared. She kept scrolling and found something else. Axel had been removed from active duty 1 day after the report was filed. No follow-up, no explanation, just a note. Recommendation for retirement, urgent. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about age. Something had gone wrong, or worse, something had been covered up. Her heart pounded as she glanced over at Gideon, who lay curled in his bed, the photo of Jamie still perched on the mantel above him. "What did they take you off the case for?" she whispered. Gideon didn't move, but his ear twitched. She opened a new tab on her screen and typed in the name of the detective listed in the old report, Detective Marcus Bell. A few results popped up. He had transferred out of Franklin 6 months after the incident. No public statement, no disciplinary actions, nothing at all. She stared at the screen. Someone had made Axel disappear, twice. First from the case, then from the world. The tea was cold now. She didn't care. Tessa sat in the quiet hum of her living room, the weight of the truth beginning to gather like a storm on the edge of her mind. In the shadows by the hearth, Gideon stirred again. Some memories bled slowly, but they never stopped bleeding. The seizure came without warning. Tessa had just finished brewing a pot of chamomile tea when she heard it. A low, guttural whimper, followed by the unmistakable thud of a body collapsing. The cup in her hand dropped and shattered. She ran into the living room, heart pounding, breath lodged in her throat. Gideon lay on his side, body rigid, legs twitching violently, his jaw clenched, froth at the corner of his mouth. His eye, the cloudy one, stared wide and unfocused. "No, no, no!" Tessa gasped, dropping to her knees beside him. "Gideon, stay with me!" Her fingers trembled as she fumbled for her phone. The number was already saved, Dr. Leona Whitaker, a no-nonsense veterinarian in her early 40s, known for both her skill and her bluntness. With her buzzed black hair, square-framed glasses, and scrub top always one size too large, she gave off the air of someone who had seen death, but refused to let it win easily. "Emergency," Tessa said when Leona answered. "He's seizing, German Shepherd, 17, name's Gideon." "Bring him in now," the vet replied, sharp and immediate. "We'll be ready." It took all of Tessa's strength to lift him. He was dead weight, heavy, unyielding, but still breathing. She wrapped him in a blanket and carried him to the car like a mother carries a sleeping child after a long day. By the time she reached the clinic, the seizure had subsided, but Gideon lay limp, his breathing shallow, heartbeat barely perceptible. Leona and her assistant, a soft-spoken young man named Bryce with sandy hair and freckles, met them at the back door. "I've got him," Leona said, taking him from Tessa's arms. "Wait here." The waiting room was too quiet, too bright. Every tick of the wall clock felt like an accusation. Tessa sat on a plastic chair and clutched her phone tightly, eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't cry. Not yet. Not while the decision hadn't been asked of her. 10 minutes passed before Leona returned, clipboard in hand, her face unreadable. "He's stable for now," she said, "but we need to talk." Tessa stood. "What's happening to him?" Leona leaned against the counter, sighing. "His kidneys are failing, liver too, age-related degeneration. The seizure was likely the result of toxin buildup, combined with malnutrition from before you adopted him. So what do we do?" "You have two options," Leona said, leveling her gaze. "One, we keep him comfortable. Let him go in peace. 2, we fight. Fluids, medications, a new diet plan, constant monitoring. It won't be easy. It might not work." Tessa's eyes burned. "But there's a chance," Leona nodded. "There's a chance, small, but real." Tessa didn't hesitate. "Then we fight." Back at home, the house was quiet again, but not in the same way. Gideon lay on a padded mat in the kitchen, a soft catheter in his leg, and a blanket over his frail body. Tessa had set an hourly alarm for his medications. She rearranged the furniture to make it easier for him to move, should he try. She didn't sleep. The next afternoon, Logan appeared at the door like clockwork, a red object tucked beneath his arm. He looked tired. School had clearly taken a toll, but his eyes lit up the moment he saw Gideon on the floor. "How is he?" he asked, crouching beside the dog. "Holding on," Tessa said. "Fighting." Logan nodded solemnly, then reached into his hoodie and pulled out the item, a bright red nylon training lead. Weathered, frayed in spots, but clean. "My dad used to take me to K9 demos when I was a kid," he said. "I found this in one of his old boxes. Thought maybe it would mean something to him." He clipped the lead gently to Gideon's collar. At first, there was nothing. Then, slowly, Gideon's ears twitched, his eyes fluttered open, his neck shifted, subtly but intentionally, toward Logan. His paw moved an inch. 2. Logan stared in awe. "Did you see that?" Tessa nodded, stunned. He responded. "Sergeant G," Logan whispered, a grin tugging at his lips, still reporting for duty. That evening, the news reported a discovery near Briarwood Creek. A pink backpack, believed to belong to Carly Matthews, was found in the woods behind 14 Willow Street, the reporter said. Detectives have not disclosed further details. Tessa dropped the spoon she was stirring broth with. The house number made her freeze. 14. She turned toward the living room where Gideon had, every morning since arriving, paused at the window and stared across the street at the abandoned house. That house. She stepped outside, wrapped in her coat. The air was cold, damp, and carried the scent of turned earth. Across the street, 14 Willow sat in ruin, windows broken, door half-boarded, grass grown wild. And there, in the patch of sidewalk where the lamplight cut through fog, Gideon stood, on all fours. She hadn't even heard him get up. His body was trembling but upright. His legs shook, but he didn't fall. He stood with all the dignity of a statue, his eyes locked on the house. "Tessa?" came a voice behind her. She turned to see Mrs. Albright, wrapped in her bathrobe and holding a mug of tea. Her gray hair was pinned messily, and her brows knit with concern. "He goes there every morning," the old woman said. "Has since day one, like he's waiting for something." Tessa's voice was a whisper. "He remembers." The next morning, she called the precinct. "I need to speak to someone about a case," she said. "A missing child, and an old K9 who might know something you don't." The morning was mist-laced and pale, the kind that clung to rooftops and drifted low across the yard like a secret not yet spoken. The windows in Tessa's home glowed with the soft warmth of firelight, but something in the air felt different. Less like waiting, more like watching. Tessa stirred a pot of broth on the stove, her motions quiet, almost reverent. Behind her, in the living room, Gideon lay curled on his blanket near the window. He hadn't stirred all morning, and she told herself that was okay. He needed rest after the seizures, after the fluids, after the battle he hadn't asked to fight, but chose anyway. Then she heard it, a shuffle, delicate. Not the dragging of a tired limb, but the tentative placement of a paw. She turned and froze. Gideon was standing. It wasn't perfect. His back legs wobbled and his neck hung lower than it used to, but he stood on all fours, steadying himself like a soldier returning to attention. He took one step forward, then another. Tessa dropped the spoon and rushed over, falling to her knees beside him. "You're standing?" she whispered, eyes already wet. "You're standing." At the doorway, Logan appeared, his hoodie zipped halfway up, hair messy from the wind. He was holding a worn composition notebook, but it fell from his hands the moment he saw Gideon. "Sergeant G?" he whispered. Gideon looked toward him and with great effort took 3 more steps. Logan dropped beside him, arms flung around the dog's neck, crying in short, uneven bursts. "I thought we lost you," the boy said. "I thought—" Tessa sat beside them, wrapping her arms around both. "We're still here," she said softly, brushing her fingers through Gideon's fur. "We're still alive." That night, the scent of buttered bread and cinnamon drifted through the neighborhood. It had started with a note from Mrs. Albright, scribbled in spidery handwriting, and slipped under Tessa's door. "Bake too much bread, bringing it over. Invite the boy and his mother. Consider it a gathering. I'll make the good tea." At 78, Helen Albright wasn't known for sentiment. She was wiry and sharp, with a voice that cut like a paring knife and eyes that missed nothing. But there was something softening in her lately, an awareness of the slow ticking of time, and a desire to fill it with something warmer than silence. Tessa brought a pot of squash soup. Logan arrived with his mother, Dana Banks, a tall woman in her early 40s with an accountant's posture and anxious eyes that rarely stopped scanning her surroundings. She wore a navy blue sweater, no makeup, and kept her hands in her lap almost the entire evening. Her relationship with Logan had been strained since her husband's death. Grief had cracked them apart. But tonight, seated beside him at Mrs. Albright's old wooden table, something shifted. Her shoulders relaxed. She laughed. Once, a soft thing, surprised out of her. Gideon lay beneath the table, his head resting on Logan's feet. He didn't move much, but his tail thumped once when Mrs. Albright placed a bit of bread near his paw. "This," she said, raising her mug of steeped lavender tea, "is what I call a miracle." Tessa smiled. "You don't believe in miracles." "I didn't," the older woman replied. "But that dog got up, and that boy stopped flinching every time someone touched his shoulder. So maybe I was wrong." They all laughed, even Dana, and for a moment it felt like family. Later that night, with the house quiet again, Tessa sat alone in the study. Her computer was open, an old photo of Jamie still framed beside it. She was writing down everything she knew about the Briarwood case. Dates, names, anomalies, including what she'd learned about Gideon's sudden removal from active duty. Then her inbox pinged. Subject, he was right. They wanted silence. From unknown sender 999@protonmail.com, the body of the email was short. "If you want to know the real reason Axel was removed, meet me at the old scrapyard off West Hollow Road, noon tomorrow. Come alone." Tessa stared at the screen, heart pounding. This wasn't paranoia anymore. Someone knew. Someone had been watching. And they were ready to talk. She copied the address into her notebook, then closed the laptop and looked over at Gideon. He was awake, eyes fixed on her. Not just watching, reading her. She stepped over and knelt beside him, cupping his face. "What did you find out there?" she whispered. "What did they make you forget?" He didn't answer, of course. But his eyes held something. An echo of purpose, buried but not broken. The next morning, the sky was silver with winter light as Tessa pulled into the abandoned scrapyard on the edge of Franklin. Rusted cars lay stacked like tombstones. Weeds clawed their way through gravel. A buzzard perched on the rim of an overturned barrel. She parked near the chain-link fence and stepped out, heart tight in her chest. A man appeared from behind an old shipping container. He was in his mid-50s, hunched slightly, with sun-damaged skin and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. His denim jacket was faded, and his boots scuffed from years of field work. He looked like someone who had once believed in justice and now just tried to stay out of its way. "You came," he said gruffly. "Who are you?" Tessa asked. "Name's Harlan Keene. Used to be a crime scene tech, Franklin PD, before I was transferred out, before they shut me up." Tessa felt her stomach twist. "You worked the Briarwood case?" He nodded. "I saw what Axel found. That dog tracked a scent under the floorboards of house number 14, scratched until his paws bled. They told us to log it as a false alarm, said the lead was too vague. But it wasn't," Tessa said. "No," Harlan replied, "it wasn't. A week later I filed a request to reopen the search zone. Next morning I was reassigned to desk duty, then transferred out of county." "Who buried it?" He looked at her, eyes tired but angry. "Detective Marcus Bell. Said the department didn't need the bad press. Said if Axel couldn't bark it in court, it didn't count." Tessa felt a chill crawl up her spine. "So they retired him, silenced him." "They erased him," Harlan muttered, "but he never forgot. Dogs like that, they don't forget." She left the scrapyard with a notebook full of truth, a heart full of rage, and one thought echoing in her mind. They tried to erase him. But Gideon, Axel, was still here, and now so was she. The morning air was clean, like something had been washed away in the night. Grief, maybe, or fear. Tessa stood barefoot on the porch, a mug of coffee warming her palms. In the yard below, sunlight filtered through a line of pine trees and landed in golden patches across the grass, where Gideon, slow but upright, sniffed a circle of ground he had already visited a dozen times before. He walked now. Not far, not quickly, but purposefully. One paw in front of the other, tail twitching like a quiet metronome. Tessa smiled. It had been a month since the scrapyard, since the truth about Axel's past, about the corruption buried inside Franklin PD, had been laid bare, and she had chosen for once not to fight. Not because she lacked strength, but because Gideon had already given enough. She'd closed the file, shut the laptop, burned the printouts, and deleted the emails. If the system wanted to forget, let it. She wouldn't. And neither would Gideon. But he wouldn't spend the rest of his days chasing ghosts. Not if she had anything to say about it. He needed peace, not proof. That decision came just in time, because life didn't wait. Logan bounded up the walkway, his curls bouncing with every step. In one hand, he held a crisp white envelope. The other was clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles had gone white. Tessa raised an eyebrow. "Good news?" He handed her the letter, eyes wide with barely contained excitement. "Read it," he breathed. She unfolded it slowly, then began scanning the contents. Midway through, her lips parted. At the end, she looked up. "You got in," she said. Logan's grin erupted and he let out a yell that startled a bird from the tree nearby. "Junior K-9 Academy," he shouted, "and they gave me a full scholarship." "That's amazing, Logan." "They said my essay was one of the best they've read in 5 years, he said breathlessly, pulling a crumpled printed copy from his hoodie pocket. "I called it The Dog Who Taught Me to Stay. I wrote about Gideon, about how he didn't run when it hurt, how he didn't quit when everyone else did." Tessa blinked against a sudden burn in her eyes. "He'll be so proud." "He already knows," Logan said, walking over to the old shepherd and crouching beside him. "Right, Sergeant G?" Gideon looked up, and for a moment something passed between them, a thread of recognition, of companionship. Then, Gideon did something rare. He pressed his head gently against Logan's chest. That afternoon, Mrs. Albright came by. She wore a wide-brimmed hat decorated with plastic cherries, and her lipstick was the boldest red Tessa had ever seen on a woman her age. Her walk had a spring to it, her steps determined. "I've made a decision," she declared. Tessa looked up from trimming dead leaves from a potted fern. "Oh, I'm selling the house." Tessa blinked. "You are?" "Yep. Don't need all that space, and the stairs creak like they're begging for a lawsuit. My granddaughter lives out near Nashville. She's got 2 kids and a garden I can ruin with advice." Tessa smiled. "You'll be missed." Albright waved a hand. "Nonsense. I'll be back every 3rd Sunday. I expect soup and bread. Always." Albright glanced toward Gideon, who lay stretched beneath the oak tree. "I'll miss him most," she said. "Old boy's got more loyalty in one paw than most men have in their whole bodies." Tessa nodded. "He's changed everything." Albright gave her a look, sharp but soft. No, dear. You changed everything. He just reminded you how. A week later, the town held its breath. The woods north of Franklin stirred with helicopters and search dogs. A new tip had led authorities back to the area near Briarwood Creek, less than a mile from House 14, where Gideon had stared for weeks without fail, where his paws had scraped the porch boards like he remembered something no one else would admit. And then, the breaking news. Carly Matthews had been found. She was alive. Thin, cold, dehydrated, but alive. She had wandered from a hidden cellar sometime during the night, following a sound she couldn't describe. It was like someone calling, she told reporters, but not with words, just something pulling me out. She had walked through briars, across shallow streams, past rusted fences and sleeping deer, until she saw the first flashlight beam. Tessa watched it unfold on TV, hand pressed to her lips, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. Gideon slept at her feet, unaware, or maybe perfectly aware, just no longer needing to prove it. 2 days later, there was a knock at her door. Tessa opened it to find a man in a Navy uniform holding Carly by the hand. The officer was middle-aged, square-faced, with a kind voice and eyes that still believed in decency. "Miss Monroe?" he asked. "Yes." "This is Carly." The girl stepped forward. Her cheeks were pale, but her eyes held the quiet resilience only children who have seen darkness carry. She was small, with wispy hair and a pink ribbon tied around one wrist like a reminder not to disappear again. Tessa knelt. "Hi, Carly." The girl didn't say anything at first. She looked around Tessa's legs and spotted Gideon, who had lifted his head at the sound of new voices. He rose slowly and walked to the door. Carly's breath caught. She stepped forward. Then, wordlessly, wrapped her arms around the dog's neck and buried her face into his shoulder. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up." Gideon stood still, leaning just slightly into her. There were no medals, no cameras, no parades, just a little girl and an old dog, and the kind of truth that didn't need to be shouted to be heard. That evening, Tessa sat with Gideon on the porch. The stars came out one by one, shy and blinking. She reached out and scratched behind his ear. "You're not Axel anymore," she said softly. "You're Gideon, and you're home." He let out a long, peaceful sigh and laid his head in her lap. And this time, it wasn't a sigh of pain. It was the kind of sigh that only comes from someone who knows the war is finally over. Sometimes, the ones the world forgets are the ones who carry the deepest stories. Gideon wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder that love, loyalty, and healing can come from the most unexpected places. In our busy lives, it's easy to overlook the quiet ones, the tired ones, the ones who seem like they've given up. But maybe all they need is someone to say, "You're still worth fighting for." If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to let us know you're still listening to the quiet voices in this world. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that heal and inspire. And may God bless every soul who finds strength in love. Type Amen in the comments if you believe every life, no matter how old, tired, or forgotten, is worth saving.